The pasta was getting cold. That was the first thing I noticed when my sister opened her mouth and said the words that would unravel my entire life. Not the look on her face. Not the wine glass she was gripping so tightly I was sure it would shatter. Just the pasta, slowly losing its steam in the center of the table, forgotten by everyone the moment the air in the room shifted. My name is Diane. I am 34 years old, and until that Thursday evening in October, I genuinely believed I was living a good life. A real life. The kind of life you look at from the outside and think, she has it all figured out. A devoted husband named Robert. A beautiful 6-year-old daughter named Lily. A home that smelled like cinnamon candles and fresh laundry. A career I'd built from nothing, managing accounts at a mid-size marketing firm. I had structure. I had purpose. I had a color-coded family calendar on the refrigerator. What I did not have, apparently, was any idea what was actually happening inside my own home. My sister Victoria is 2 years younger than me, and she has always been the kind of woman who says the quiet part loud. She doesn't do subtlety. She doesn't do diplomacy. She calls things what they are, even when what they are is ugly, even when the timing is catastrophic, even when the pasta is getting cold and your husband is sitting right across the table. That evening had started normally. Robert had suggested we have Victoria over for dinner, which I thought was sweet of him. They had always gotten along well, or so I believed. Victoria had arrived with a bottle of red wine and a tension around her jaw that I had chalked up to the long drive from downtown. We sat. We ate. We talked about Lily's school play, about the neighbor's renovation project, about whether or not winter was coming early this year. And then Victoria set her fork down. She set it down so deliberately, so carefully, that I heard the small metallic click above everything else. Robert heard it too. I watched his eyes flick toward her. Just for a second. Just long enough to tell me something was already wrong. Diane, Victoria said. I need to say something. I laughed a little. I don't know why. Nervous reflex, maybe. You look so serious. What, did you dent my car? She didn't smile. I've been sitting on this for 3 months, she said. And I can't sit on it anymore. It's eating me alive. The room felt suddenly, inexplicably smaller. Robert reached for his wine glass with a hand that was almost perfectly steady. Vicky, this isn't, he started. Don't. She looked at him. Just one word, but it landed like a door slamming. Then she turned back to me. Diane, I need you to listen to me. Really listen. Not as my sister. As a woman who deserves the truth. I put my fork down too. I think I already knew on some primal, buried level that my life was about to split in two. That there would be a before and an after, and that this dinner, this cold pasta, this deliberate click of silverware against porcelain, this was the exact moment of the fracture. Robert has not been who you think he is, Victoria said quietly. I've seen things I should have told you about sooner. And I'm sorry it took me this long. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear Lily's cartoon playing softly upstairs. Robert set his glass down. He looked at Victoria with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger exactly. Something more calculated than anger. Something that sent a cold wire threading through the center of my chest. You don't know what you're talking about, he said. His voice was calm. Terrifyingly calm. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Victoria didn't flinch. And so do you. I looked at my husband. I looked at my sister. And I opened my mouth to speak, to ask the question that was building behind my teeth like pressure before a storm. And that was when Victoria did something I did not expect. She turned to me. And she said, I dare you to disappear for a few days. Just vanish. Tell no one where you're going. And you'll see, Diane. You'll see exactly who Robert is when he thinks you're not watching. I stared at her. What does that even mean? I whispered. She picked up her fork. She looked at me with the steadiest eyes I had ever seen on another human being. It means, she said, that the man sitting across from you right now is not who you married. And before I could respond, before I could breathe, Robert stood up from the table. Not aggressively. Not dramatically. He just stood up, said he needed some air, and walked out the back door into the October night. He didn't take his jacket. He didn't take his phone. But when I looked at the table where his phone had been sitting face down all evening, I noticed something that made my blood go quiet. There was a second phone. A small, dark device I had never seen before. And it was blinking. I should have picked it up immediately. That would have been the rational thing to do. The linear, logical response to finding an unknown device sitting on your dinner table after your sister just imploded your entire evening. Pick it up. Look at it. Know what you're dealing with. Instead, I sat completely still and stared at it like it was a grenade someone had rolled across the table. Victoria was watching me. She wasn't moving either. It was as if we both understood, instinctively, that whatever was on that phone was a threshold. And once you cross a threshold like that, you cannot uncross it. How long? I finally asked her. My voice came out strange. Too flat. Too measured, like I was reading words off a page. I started noticing things about 4 months ago, Victoria said. The way he'd step out of the room when certain calls came in. The nights he told you he was working late. I happened to be driving past his office building twice during those weeks, Diane. His car wasn't there. I looked at the back door. Still closed. The kitchen light was throwing a yellow rectangle across the tile, and outside the window was just darkness. He could have parked elsewhere, I said. Diane. He could have been at a client site. Diane. Her voice was soft but firm. The phone. I looked back at it. It had stopped blinking. The screen had gone dark again, retreating into its secret like a creature pulling back into its shell. I reached out and picked it up. It wasn't locked. That was the first shocking thing. No pin. No face recognition. Either he had gotten sloppy, or he simply hadn't expected anyone else to be at this table tonight. The screen lit up and showed me a home screen with no identifiable apps, just the basic default setup, stripped down and clean, the kind of phone you configure specifically to look like nothing. Except for one app. A messaging app one recognized from the news, the encrypted kind, the kind journalists use, the kind people use when they specifically do not want a record kept. And there was a notification from it. A single unread message. My thumb hovered over it. Victoria said very quietly, "You don't have to look at it tonight." "Yes, I do," I said. I pressed it open. The message was from a contact saved simply as a letter. One letter. K. And the message read, "Is she gone yet?" The timestamp was 11 minutes ago. Right around the time Robert had suggested Victoria come for dinner. Right around the time I had been in the kitchen putting the pasta on the stove. Is she gone yet? Not is everything okay? Not when are you free? Not anything that could be explained away or softened or given the benefit of the doubt. Is she gone yet? I set the phone back on the table. I placed it face down exactly where it had been, exactly as I had found it. And I sat up very straight in my chair, and I looked at my sister. "Tell me everything," I said. "Everything you know. Right now." Victoria took a breath. And she told me. She had been at the coffee shop near Robert's office 6 weeks ago, when she saw him walk in with a woman she didn't recognize. She might have dismissed it, a colleague, a client, except that the way they sat together was not the way colleagues sit. It was the specific, studied casualness of two people who were deliberately not touching each other in public. She had seen them 3 times after that. Twice at the coffee shop. Once getting into his car in a parking garage 2 blocks from our daughter's school. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Because I wanted to be sure," Victoria said. "Because you are my sister, Diane, and I have watched you build your entire life around this man. I needed to be sure. And now you're sure." She met my eyes. "Now I'm sure." The back door opened. Robert walked back in. He looked calm, collected. He sat back down at the table, picked up his fork, and looked at both of us with an expression that managed, somehow, to be both apologetic and entirely unbothered. "Sorry about that," he said. "I just needed a minute." He did not look at the phone. He didn't need to. Because from where he was sitting, it was still exactly where he had left it. Face down. Unrevealed. He had no idea I had already read the message. And that was when I made a decision. A dangerous, terrifying, potentially life-altering decision that I had never once in my 34 years of careful living ever come close to making before. I was going to do exactly what Victoria had dared me to do. I was going to disappear. I just hadn't yet figured out what I was going to find when I did, or whether I was strong enough to survive it. I didn't sleep that night. Robert did. That was the part that hollowed me out the most. The part one kept turning over in the dark while the clock on the nightstand ticked toward 2, then 3, then 4 in the morning. He slept. Deeply, evenly, with the untroubled rhythm of a man who believed everything was still exactly as he had arranged it. I lay next to him and counted his breaths and tried to understand how a person could do that. How you could sit at a dinner table with your wife and your sister-in-law and survive that kind of conversation, and then come upstairs, brush your teeth, get into bed and sleep. Either he was completely innocent, or he was so practiced at this that he had made an art of it. By 5 in the morning, I had made my plan. Not a perfect plan. Not even a smart one by any conventional measure. But it was a plan, and it was mine, and it was all I had. I would call in sick to work for 3 days. I would tell Robert that my company was sending me to an out-of-town client meeting, something that happened occasionally, something he wouldn't question. I would ask my mother to take Lily for a long weekend, framing it as a special grandmother-granddaughter trip, which Lily would adore and which my mother would ask no difficult questions about. And then I would vanish. I would go somewhere no one knew. I would leave my regular phone visible and trackable at a friend's apartment across town, because I already knew, without knowing exactly how I knew, that Robert would check. He had always known my phone's location. It had started years ago as a safety thing, a mutual thing, and I had never questioned it because I had never had reason to. Until now. I would buy a cheap prepaid phone. I would use cash. I would stay somewhere ordinary and anonymous, and from that anonymous nowhere, I would watch. I had no idea yet exactly what I would see. That morning, I got up before Robert made coffee, packed Lily's school bag, and kissed my daughter on top of her head while she ate her cereal and told me about a dream she'd had about purple horses. I smiled at the right moments. I asked the right questions. I handed her backpack at the door and watched the school bus pull away, and I did not cry, which was its own kind of miracle. Then I called Victoria from the back garden, keeping my voice low and even. "I'm doing it," I told her. A pause. Then, when? "Friday morning. I need 3 days. Diane. Don't try to talk me out of it." "I'm not," she said. "I'm going to help you. Tell me what you need." That was when I told her the first part of my plan. And she agreed to everything without hesitation. But before we hung up, she said something that stopped me cold. "There's one more thing I didn't tell you last night," Victoria said. "About Robert. About who he actually is." I gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean, who he actually is?" "I mean, I did some digging after I first saw them together," she said. "I hired someone, Diane, just to do some basic background research. I know how that sounds. But I needed to be sure." The morning air felt suddenly colder. "And the person I hired found something," Victoria said carefully. "Something about Robert's history. From before you met him. Something he never told you about." I waited. "I'm not going to tell you over the phone," she said. "I'll tell you Friday. In person. After you've started." "Victoria. Trust me," she said. "You need to be somewhere safe when you hear this. Okay. Just trust me." The line was quiet for a long moment. And then she said the one thing she should not have said. The one sentence that would turn a plan about a cheating husband into something I had no map for, no preparation for, no category to put it in. She said, "Robert isn't just not who you think he is, Diane. He's not who anyone thinks he is." She hung up before I could ask what that meant. I left at 6:47 on a Friday morning. I know the exact time because I checked the clock on the microwave as I set my coffee mug in the sink, and I remember thinking, with a strange, dissociative clarity, this is the last ordinary moment. After this, everything I know about my life becomes a before. Robert was in the shower. I could hear the water running upstairs. Lily was at my mother's. I had dropped her off the night before, sold it beautifully as an adventure, complete with a tiny suitcase covered in unicorn stickers. My mother had asked no difficult questions. She had just hugged me a little longer than usual at the door, the way mothers do when they can sense something is wrong but decide not to push. I had left my regular phone on the kitchen counter, propped against the fruit bowl where Robert would see it. This part was critical. He needed to believe I had simply forgotten it in my morning rush to catch an early train, the kind of thing a distracted, overworked professional wife might plausibly do. The location would show up as home until I got to the train station, and then I would hand it off to a colleague who had agreed to take it across town and keep it at her place for the weekend, no questions asked. I walked out the front door with nothing but a shoulder bag. No goodbye. No note. Just the quiet click of the latch behind me. The prepaid phone connected on the second try. Victoria answered immediately. "You're out?" she asked. "I'm out." "Okay. Come to the address I texted you. We need to talk before you get settled." I had booked a room at a budget hotel 40 minutes away. Far enough to be invisible, close enough to get back quickly if something with Lily came up. I took public transit. Paid cash for the day pass. Sat in the back of the train and watched the city slide past the windows and thought about all the ordinary Fridays I had spent on this same route going to work, never once imagining that I would be here, doing this, unraveling. Victoria was waiting for me at a small cafe near her apartment. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in the corner booth with 2 coffees and a manila folder on the table in front of her. The folder was thick. I sat down. I looked at the folder. I looked at her. Tell me, I said. She put her hands flat on the table. Before I do, I need you to understand that I verified everything in here. The person I hired is credible. I've cross-checked what they found with publicly accessible records. This isn't speculation. Victoria, tell me. She opened the folder. The first page was a photograph. It took me a moment to recognize him. Younger, different hair, a beard he no longer had. But the jaw was the same. The eyes were the same. Below the photograph was a name. Not Robert's name. A different name entirely. I looked up at my sister. What is this? Robert isn't his real name, Victoria said. His legal name, the name on his original birth certificate, the name attached to his social security number before he changed it 11 years ago. It's different. And the reason he changed it is what you need to understand. My mouth was dry. Why did he change it? Victoria reached across the table and pressed her fingertips briefly over mine. Because 11 years ago, she said, there was a woman in another state. A woman who was married to him. And that woman disappeared. The cafe noise faded to white static. Disappeared, I repeated. What do you mean disappeared? Victoria looked at me steadily. Carefully. The case was never solved, she said. She was never found. And the investigation was eventually suspended. But at the time, Diane, at the time, her husband was the primary suspect. I looked back down at the photograph of the man I had been sleeping next to for 8 years. The man who, right now, was in our shower. In our home. Alone, without me, with no idea I already knew. And then Victoria said the part that broke me completely open. Her name was Greta, she said. And she did exactly what I dared you to do. She disappeared for a few days to test him. She never came home. I did not fall apart. I want to be honest about that, because in the movies, this is the moment where the protagonist dissolves. Where she collapses into the cafe booth, and weeps, and has to be held together by someone else's steadiness. I did not do that. What I did was pick up the photograph and hold it under the light, and look at the face of the man I had married for a very long time without speaking. I looked at the shape of his nose and the way his eyes sat in his head, and I searched the face of this younger stranger for evidence of the man who had made me coffee this morning before I'd even gotten downstairs. I found him. He was there. He had always been there. That was the worst part. What was his name? I asked. My voice was steady. I was almost frightened by how steady it was. Before the name change, he was Daniel Ware, Victoria said. He was 31 at the time. He and Greta had been married for 3 years. She was 28 when she disappeared. I set the photograph down. And the investigation was handled by a county sheriff's department in rural Georgia. Low resources. The case went cold within about 2 years. He had already relocated by then. Changed his name legally in a different state. She paused. By the time you met him, he had been Robert Calloway for 4 years. I thought about the first night I had met Robert. A fundraiser for a children's charity that a colleague had dragged me to. He had been charming and warm and quietly funny in the way that takes you off guard. He had known exactly what to say and exactly when to stop talking, which I had found irresistible. I had been so flattered by how carefully he had seemed to listen. Does he know that anyone knows about this? I asked. Not as far as I can tell. Does he know about your investigator? No. I nodded slowly. And the woman, Kay? The one on the phone? Victoria's expression shifted. Just slightly. We're working on that. Who's we? She looked at me carefully. I didn't do this alone, Diane. I brought someone else in. I stared at her. Who? She pulled a business card from the inside of the folder and slid it across the table. I picked it up. It had a name and a phone number, and the word investigations beneath it. Nothing else. No logo. No address. His name is Felix, Victoria said. He's been doing this for 20 years. He's the one who found the connection to Georgia. He's also been watching Robert for the last 3 weeks. Watching him how? Following him. Documenting. Photographing. She reached into the folder and produced a second set of photographs. These were different, surveillance shots, candid, taken from a distance. Robert in his car. Robert outside a restaurant. Robert walking into a building I didn't immediately recognize. And in 2 of the photographs, Robert was with a woman. Blonde. Late 20s or early 30s. Beautiful in the specifically polished way of someone who is very aware of being looked at. Kay, I said. Her name is Katia, Victoria said. She is not from here. She moved to the city 8 months ago. 8 months. I thought about 8 months ago. What we had been doing 8 months ago. Lily had just started 1st grade. We had taken a family trip to the coast. Robert had been particularly attentive that weekend. Particularly affectionate. I thought I understood now why. Does Felix know where they've been meeting? I asked. Yes. And does he know what Robert is doing this weekend? While I'm supposedly gone. Victoria met my eyes. That, she said slowly, is exactly why today was the day. Felix has been watching Robert since you left this morning. He called me 20 minutes ago. She picked up her own phone from the table. Turned it toward me so I could see the screen. There was a message from a contact labeled Felix. It read, he's moving. He's not going to the office. You need to tell her now. The address is attached. Below the message was an address. I looked at it. I did not recognize the street, but I recognized the neighborhood. It was a residential neighborhood in the northwest part of the city. The kind with old brownstones and mature trees and detached garages. The kind of neighborhood where a woman could have a life that no one else knew about. What's at that address? I asked. Victoria set her phone face down on the table. That, she said, is what we need to find out. She stood up. She looked at me with something that was partly apology and partly fierce, unwavering love. Felix is already there, she said. Are you coming with me? I looked down at the photograph of Daniel Ware, who had become Robert Calloway, who had become the man I had married, who had made me coffee this morning and gone to shower while I walked out the front door with a bag on my shoulder and a plan built on fear and instinct. I put the photograph back in the folder. I stood up. Lead the way, I said. If you're still watching right now, you're exactly the kind of viewer I love. Subscribe so I can keep giving you stories that touch your heart. Hit that bell so you never miss what happens next. The house was yellow. That's the detail that got me. Of all the ways I had imagined this moment on the drive over, all the cinematic darkness, the gray concrete and harsh angles my mind had constructed, the house was yellow. A warm, cheerful, lived-in yellow, with white window trim and a small front porch where someone had placed 2 clay pots of late-season mums in rust and gold. It looked like a home someone loved. Felix was parked across the street in an unremarkable gray sedan. He was a compact, quiet man in his mid-50s with a calm face and watchful eyes that had clearly seen worse things than this. He greeted Victoria with familiarity, and me with a careful nod that acknowledged everything without naming any of it. He arrived at 9:17, Felix said, without looking up from the small screen he was monitoring. He used a key. Not a doorbell. Not a knock. A key. I stood on the sidewalk opposite the yellow house, and held that information inside my chest, and let it settle into all the places it fit. The late nights. The phone face down on the dinner table. The shower this morning while I packed my bag and prepared to vanish. A key meant permanence. A key meant he had been here before, many times, enough times to have a key. A key meant this was not a hotel room or a borrowed arrangement. A key meant he had been living a second life, parallel and complete, while I color-coded our family calendar and worried about whether Lily's teacher was challenging her enough in reading group. Is she inside? Victoria asked. Arrived the night before, Felix said. No movement since. I looked at the house. The curtains in the front window were drawn, but light leaked around the edges. Warm light. Morning light. The kind that means someone is in there, awake, comfortable, unafraid. I want to go to the door, I said. Both Felix and Victoria turned to look at me. Diane, Victoria started. I'm not going to do anything dramatic, I said. I'm not going to scream. I'm not going to confront anyone on the front porch. I paused. I just want to see the door. Felix studied me for a moment. Then he nodded. Keep to the sidewalk. If either of them come out, you turn and walk. You don't engage. Agreed. Agreed. I crossed the street. The morning air was cool and damp, and smelled like fallen leaves, and something cooking somewhere nearby. My footsteps were quiet on the pavement. I walked slowly like someone taking a morning stroll, and I let my eyes move across the front of the yellow house with its cheerful mums and its drawn curtains and its secret. I was almost past the front path when the door opened. I froze. Robert stepped out onto the porch. He was in casual clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, the kind of Saturday morning comfort that I recognized. He was holding 2 coffee cups. He turned back to say something to whoever was inside, and he was smiling. He was smiling in a way I had not seen on his face in a long time. He did not see me. I was on the sidewalk and his eyes were on the door, and the angle was slightly off, and I was, in that moment, invisible. And that's what allowed me to see what happened next. The woman appeared in the doorway. Katya. She was smaller than I'd expected, wrapped in a cardigan, her blonde hair loose. She took the coffee cup from Robert and looked up at him and said something I couldn't hear, and he laughed and pressed his free hand briefly to the side of her face. Tender. Completely, devastatingly tender. That small gesture, the hand against her face, the smile, the 2 coffee cups on a Saturday morning. That was the thing that finally broke through whatever wall I had been holding up inside myself since Thursday night. Not rage. Not grief. Something colder and more clarifying than either. I turned around. I walked back across the street. I got back into Felix's car, and I sat there and I breathed very carefully, in and out, while Victoria watched me from the front seat. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I need you to tell me something," I said. "Can Felix prove it?" "The connection to Georgia. Can he prove that Robert is Daniel Ware?" Felix glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "I have documentation. Tax records from before the name change, linked to the same social security number. A photograph that I can match to a 20-year-old driver's license. And I have a contact at the Georgia Sheriff's Office who has the original case file." "The case on Greta," I said. "Yes. Is it still open?" Felix was quiet for a moment. Then, "As of 3 months ago, no. But cold cases can be reopened." I leaned back in the seat. Outside the window, the yellow house sat in the morning light, warm and ordinary and full of lies. "And Katia," I said. "What do you know about her?" Felix hesitated. That hesitation told me more than his answer did. "That's actually the part," he said carefully. "That changes everything. She was not what I thought she was. That was the part none of us had seen coming. Not Victoria, who had started this whole unraveling. Not Felix, who had spent 3 weeks documenting and cross-referencing and building a case brick by brick. Not me, sitting in the back of a gray sedan outside a yellow house, preparing to feel a particular kind of betrayed. Katia was not Robert's girlfriend. She was a private investigator. Felix had discovered this 2 days ago, which was why he had sent Victoria that urgent message that morning, why the timing had become suddenly critical. Katia's license was registered in another state, but Felix had recognized her name from a professional database he had access to. 12 years of experience. She specialized in one category of case. Missing persons. "She's been building a case on Robert for at least 6 months, Felix told me, still watching the house from behind his car window. "She came here from Atlanta. She was hired by Greta's family." I stared at him. "Greta's family hired a private investigator." "Greta's sister," he said. "She never believed the case was truly cold. She's been quietly looking for Robert, for Daniel Ware, for years. When she finally tracked him here, she hired Katia to get close. To gather evidence." The world tilted slightly on its axis. "Get close how?" I asked slowly. "She's been building a relationship with him," Felix said. "Deliberately. Carefully. To get him to trust her. To get him to talk." I processed this. "Does Robert know who she is?" "No." He paused. "At least not as of 2 days ago." Victoria turned around from the front seat to look at me fully. "Diane, this means you're not the only one running a parallel investigation. Katia has been collecting evidence that could connect Robert to Greta's disappearance. Real evidence. The kind that could reopen the case." "What kind of evidence?" I asked. "We don't know yet," Felix admitted. "But the fact that she's here today, specifically this weekend when you're supposed to be away, that is not a coincidence. Something is happening today." I looked back at the house. The curtains were still drawn. Robert's car was in the driveway. Nobody had moved. And then I thought of something. Something that made the cold inside me go absolutely still. "The message on his phone," I said. "Is she gone yet?" "He sent that before dinner." Before Victoria said anything. "Yes," Felix said. "Which means he planned this," I said. "This whole weekend. He arranged for me to have a reason to be away, and then did he know? Did someone tip him off that I was going to be gone?" Felix and Victoria exchanged a look. "What?" I said. "There's a possibility," Victoria said carefully, "that Robert wasn't just passively waiting for you to be away. There's a possibility that he engineered it." I felt the bottom of my stomach drop. "Engineered it how?" "The client meeting your company sent you to," she said. "The out-of-town trip you told him about this morning." "That's not real," I said. "I made it up. I called in sick." "But how did you explain the trip to him?" I thought back to this morning. The casual, rehearsed lie I had delivered over coffee while he sat at the kitchen counter scrolling his phone. I had told him I had a last-minute client trip, that I'd gotten the call yesterday afternoon, that I'd be back Sunday night. He didn't question it, I said slowly. "No," Victoria agreed. "He didn't. He accepted it immediately, without a single follow-up question. The implications settled over me like cold water. Either he had believed me so completely that it required no questions, or he had already known I was going to say something like that, because the absence was already planned. Not by me, but by him. Who told you about the client trip? Victoria asked. How did you explain your absence to work? I told my supervisor I had a family situation and needed 3 personal days. And Robert, did you ever tell him about an upcoming work trip? Anything vague weeks ago? I thought hard, and then I stopped thinking and went very quiet. 2 weeks ago, Robert had mentioned, casually over dinner, that things seemed really busy at my office lately. He had said you might need to travel again soon, with that account they gave you. And I had said yes, probably. And he had said just let me know so I can plan around it. I had thought nothing of it. He planted the idea, I said. He planted a reason for me to be away, so that when he needed me gone, he could nudge me toward explaining my absence in a way that would make sense. Victoria pressed her lips together. That's what Felix thinks. That's a sophisticated level of manipulation, I said. Yes, Felix said quietly. It is. We sat in silence for a moment. And then my prepaid phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it. It read, Mrs. Calloway. My name is Katia. We need to talk. Not here. Please come to the coffee shop on Maple at 11 a.m. I know about your sister. I know about the investigation. And I have something you need to see before tonight, because tonight Robert has plans that none of us are ready for. I stared at the screen. How does she have this number? I whispered. Felix reached into his jacket pocket and produced his own phone. He looked at it for a moment. Then he let out a slow breath. Because, he said, it appears that Katia has been watching all of us. I went alone. Victoria argued against it. Felix argued against it with more specific and procedural language about safety protocols and unverified contacts. I listened to both of them, and then I picked up my bag and got out of the car and walked to the coffee shop on Maple. Some decisions don't belong to reason. They belong to something older and more fundamental. I was done sitting in back seats while other people managed the story of my life. This was my life. My daughter. My 8 years. My Thursday dinner table with its cold pasta and its blinking secret phone. I pushed open the door. She was in the back. I recognized her from the photographs, the blonde hair, the composed, watchful posture. She was sitting with both hands visible on the table, which I noticed, and which I suspected was deliberate. No coffee. Just a closed laptop and a small recorder, which she immediately slid off the table into her bag as I approached. Thank you for coming, she said. You didn't give me much choice, I said. How did you get my number? Your sister's investigator is not the only one who can run a trace, she said. There was no apology in her voice. Just efficiency. I've been tracking this situation for 6 months, Mrs. Calloway. That includes tracking everyone connected to your husband. Did you know about me from the beginning? From the moment I arrived in this city. She paused. I want you to know that I am sorry for what this must feel like. What I've done, getting close to him, allowing him to believe that I care for him, is not something I take lightly. But Greta Ware's family has spent 11 years not knowing what happened to her. Her sister has not slept properly in 11 years. I sat down. Did he hurt her? Katia looked at me steadily. I believe so. Yes. Do you have proof? I have enough to reopen the case, she said. But I need one more thing. And that's why today is so important. That's why tonight matters so much. What happens tonight? She opened her laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was a series of messages, screenshotted, time-stamped, from the encrypted messaging app one had found on Robert's secret phone. I read them. It took me about 90 seconds. When I finished, I looked up at Katia and I felt something that was not quite fear and not quite rage, but lived somewhere in the narrow space between. He thinks I'm out of the picture, I said. Yes. He thinks this weekend is his window. Yes. She took a breath. He has been moving money, Mrs. Calloway. For the past 3 months, steadily, in amounts small enough not to trigger flags. Accounts you don't know about. And the messages suggest that this weekend, while you were meant to be away, was when he planned to make the final transfer and start the process of leaving. Leaving, I repeated. Leaving as in? Leaving the city. Leaving the country, potentially. With assets restructured and accounts emptied, and a woman named Diane Calloway left with nothing but a mortgage and a 6-year-old daughter, and no explanation. The coffee shop hummed around us. A barista called out a name. Somebody laughed at a corner table. He's done this before, I said. It wasn't a question. We believe so, Katia said quietly. Not with Greta's assets. She didn't have much. But there were questions at the time about money that was moved before she disappeared. Small amounts. A pattern. I folded my hands on the table. I thought about Lily at my mother's house, blissfully unaware, probably being fed pancakes and watching cartoons. What do you need from me? I asked. He trusts you, Katia said. Which means he will not expect you. And right now, that is the most valuable thing in this entire situation. She leaned slightly forward. Tonight, he's going back to the house. Alone. Katia. I am going to have ended things this afternoon. He won't know what's coming. He'll be in an emotional state, and emotional states make careful men careless. She paused. I need someone in that house. Someone who can access his laptop and his home files while he's distracted. Someone with a reason to be there. You want me to go home? I want you to appear to come home early, she said. Unexpectedly. With a reason, a forgotten medication, a worry about Lily, anything. It gives him no time to prepare. And while he's managing the surprise of your return, I need approximately 4 minutes with access to his home office. I stared at her. You want to come into my house? Felix can run the extraction remotely if I have the device. I just need to be the one to get it. I was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, a woman walked past with a dog on a leash and a coffee in her hand, and the specific, unhurried freedom of someone who had no idea that anything was happening anywhere. If I do this, I said carefully, what guarantees do I have? What protects me? What protects my daughter? Katia reached into her bag and produced a card. Not a business card. An actual government-issue card. I looked at it. My breath stopped. I started. I have been working with a federal task force on this case for the past 2 months, she said. The private investigator cover is real. So is my license. But I have been feeding information to investigators who handle financial crime and unresolved missing persons cases across state lines. She looked at me calmly. You are not alone in this room, Mrs. Calloway. You have never been alone in this, even when it felt that way. I looked back down at the card. And then I made the decision that I had no way of knowing would change absolutely everything by morning. I drove home at 7:43 that evening. Victoria was parked 3 blocks away. Felix was 2 blocks in the other direction. Katia was not visible anywhere, which was the point. I sat in the car outside my own house for 4 minutes and looked at the front windows and the light that was on in the kitchen and the shadow of movement behind the glass that was my husband, alone in a house he thought was empty, doing the things that men do when they believe they are not being watched. I thought about Greta, 28 years old, married for 3 years, doing exactly this, appearing where she was not expected, looking for truth in the gaps. I thought about her sister, who had waited 11 years for an answer. I thought about Lily's suitcase covered in unicorn stickers. I got out of the car. I went to the front door and I used my key and I pushed it open and I called out. Robert? It's me. The trip got canceled. The movement in the kitchen went absolutely still. Silence. 3 seconds. 4. And then he appeared in the kitchen doorway, and I watched his face cycle through things too fast and too unguarded to conceal, shock, calculation, something that looked disturbingly like the management of alarm. You're home, he said. The client canceled, I said. I kept my voice light and slightly tired, the voice of a woman who has had a frustrating day and just wants to be home. I'm sorry, I should have called. My phone's been dead since the train. I forgot my charger at the office. This was the detail that would either work or unravel everything. He processed it. I watched him process it, watched him take the explanation and run it against whatever internal framework he used to assess risk. He smiled. Well, he said, opening his arms slightly, welcome home. I crossed the room and let him hug me. He put his arms around me, and I stood inside the embrace of a man who was planning to empty our accounts and vanish. And I pressed my face briefly into his shoulder and breathed. You hungry? He said. I was just making something. Starving, I said. But I need to get out of these work clothes first. I'm just going to run upstairs for 10 minutes. Take your time, he said. He had already turned back to the stove. I went up the stairs. I did not go to the bedroom. I went to his office, and I sent a single message from the prepaid phone, which I had been holding in my jacket pocket since I got out of the car. We're in. I will not describe exactly what happened in the next 40 minutes in detail, because some of it belongs to a legal process that was still ongoing when I eventually sat down to tell this story. What I will say is that Katia came in through the back door, which I had unlocked when I went to the kitchen for a glass of water, in a single seamless action I had practiced so many times in the car that it was nearly automatic. And what I will say is that Felix and his remote access, and the 4 minutes Katia needed were enough. More than enough. What they found on Robert's home laptop was not just financial records. Not just transfer logs and offshore account details, and the digital fingerprints of a man systematically gutting a shared life. There was a folder. Password protected, but Felix walked Katia through the override in under 3 minutes. Inside the folder were files, documents, photographs, and a journal. A journal that began 11 years ago, with an entry dated the week before Greta were disappeared. I did not read it that night. I was handed a photograph of the cover page by Katia as she slipped back out the way she had come, and I stood at the top of my staircase and looked at it, and understood that what had begun as a dinner dare had become something so much larger and darker and more significant than any of us had known to prepare for. Robert called from downstairs. "Food's ready." I put the photograph in my pocket. I went downstairs. I sat across from my husband at the kitchen table. The same table where Victoria had set her fork down 4 days ago with that small, deliberate click. And I ate the food he had made, and I answered his questions about the cancelled trip, and I laughed at something he said, and I held the knowledge inside me like a coal, burning steady and low. And I waited. At 9:15, there was a knock at the front door. Robert frowned. "Who's that?" "I'll get it," I said. I went to the door and I opened it. There were 2 people standing on the porch. Neither of them was Katia. Neither of them was Felix or Victoria. They showed me identification. I stepped back from the door. And I said clearly and steadily and without a single tremor in my voice, "He's in the kitchen." They took him at 9:22. He didn't shout. He didn't resist. He walked through the living room between 2 federal investigators with the same controlled, surface calm that had defined him for as long as I had known him, and he turned his head once to look at me as he passed, and I looked back. I had spent the last 4 days trying to understand what I would feel in this moment. I had constructed emotional frameworks in hotel rooms and cafe booths and the back seats of surveillance cars. I had prepared for rage, for collapse, for the specific grief of watching something you built get carried away. What I actually felt was simpler than any of that. I felt like I could breathe. Not because it was over. It was nowhere near over. The legal proceedings, the financial untangling, the conversation I would eventually have with Lily in age-appropriate language, the work of rebuilding, all of that was still ahead of me, enormous and complicated and real. I was not naive enough to think that watching the door close behind him was the end of anything. But the secret was gone. The weight of not knowing, of living inside a story that had been authored by someone else without my knowledge, that specific, suffocating weight lifted the moment the door closed, and I stood in my front hallway in my own house, and filled my lungs and exhaled, and stood in my own story for the first time in longer than I had realized. Victoria arrived 20 minutes later. She drove over the moment I called her, and she came through the front door and looked at me, and we stood in the hallway of my house, and she held me and neither of us spoke for a long time. Eventually I said, "You were right." She laughed a little into my hair. "I'm not happy about being right." "I know," I said. "But I am. I mean, not happy, but you know," she said. "But I know." In the months that followed, the case against Robert, against Daniel Ware, was built in layers, the way cases like this always are. The financial fraud charges came first, cleanest, and most documentable. The connection to Georgia took longer, required the coordination of investigators across 2 states, required Greta's sister to answer questions and provide records and wait, again, in the particular and brutal way she had already been waiting for 11 years. I learned about Greta in increments. Her sister shared photographs with me eventually, not because she wanted anything from me, but because she felt, I think, that I deserved to see who the woman was, who she had been before the journal entry, and the question of what happened, and the 11 years of her family not sleeping properly. Greta had been a teacher. She had liked hiking and bad puns and growing tomatoes on her apartment balcony. She had been, by her sister's account, the kind of person who made rooms feel warmer just by being in them. She had been 28 years old, and she had tried to find the truth, and she had not had what I had. She had not had a Victoria. She had not had a Felix or a Katia, or 2 federal investigators who knew the history and had been quietly building toward this moment. She had disappeared alone. I think about that often. Not with guilt. Guilt would be too easy, would let me organize the tragedy into something manageable. I think about it with a specific, clear-eyed grief that refuses to be tidied up. There is something I want to say about disappearing, about what it means to step outside your life and look at it from the outside. I had spent so many years being essential, being the keeper of schedules and the filler of gaps and the person who held the family calendar together with color-coded logic. I had defined my worth by my usefulness and my presence, by how much I would be missed if I were gone. What I discovered in those 3 days and 40 minutes was that my value had nothing to do with whether I was visible. The things that were real, Lily, Victoria, the people who loved me without agenda, those things held. The things that had been constructed around me by someone who needed an audience and a cover story and a wife, those things dissolved the moment I was no longer performing the role he had written for me. I had stepped off the stage, and the stage had turned out to be the illusion. Lily is 7 now. She knows that her father is going through some things and is living somewhere else for a while, and that she can talk to her therapist about her feelings, which she does with impressive articulacy for a 7-year-old. She asked me once, in the car on the way home from school, whether I was sad. I thought about how to answer honestly without overwhelming her. Sometimes, I said, but mostly I feel like I found something. What did you find? She asked. I looked in the rearview mirror at her serious little face. I found out that I'm stronger than I thought I was, I said. She considered this. Did you know before? Not really. How did you find out? I thought about a Thursday dinner and cold pasta, and a sister who said the truest, most dangerous, most necessary thing at exactly the right moment. Someone dared me, I said. Lily processed this with the profound gravity of 7-year-olds everywhere. Like a truth or dare, she said. Exactly like that, I said. She nodded, apparently satisfied. Outside the window, the October trees were doing their annual transformation, burning red and gold and rust, making the most spectacular possible event out of letting go. Mom, she said after a moment. Yeah, Bug. I'm glad you came back. I reached back and found her small hand without looking and held it. Me too, I said. Me too. To Greta. Whoever you were, wherever you are, you deserved better. We haven't stopped looking.